Jane is now going to join us. Thanks.
Thanks. Good evening.
We're starting from the beginning, right?
They're putting up a pretty picture for me. So my name is Jane Stahl. I came to Connecticut 40 years ago with a bachelor's of environmental studies in hand, my master's in natural policy resources and management. And I came to work for the Department of Environmental Protection as it was, please, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go sit down. As it was developing its federal coastal management program. I left DEP almost 30 years later, having served along the way as both its assistant director of the Office of Long Island Sound Programs, and then towards the end as its deputy commissioner for air, waste, and water programs. So this project brought me back to my roots, which reminded me that the coastal management program was built to balance the development of our shoreline between natural resource protections, water-dependent use protections, and economic development. And it was built to balance the jurisdictions of state authorities and local home rule that Connecticut is so proud of. There wouldn't be a coastal management program in Connecticut if it were a state-run program. Local home rule was key to its development and its success because it is the local municipalities with their knowledge of their people and their interests and their needs to protect and balance those natural resources, water-dependent uses, and property rights that could not be handled at the state level. The basis for the decision-making under the Coastal Management Act are a series of policies and standards that apply at each level of government. In this instance, the decision resides with the Municipal Planning and Zoning Commission as to whether or not to rezone this site. DEP's mission is not the same as the municipality's mission. Its mission is to promote those same interests, but from a farther distance. So the main areas of coastal consistency review associated with this project are the same areas that are within not only your jurisdiction, but within your plan of conservation and development. So I want to talk tonight a little bit about water-dependent uses, and then touch briefly on coastal hazard areas and flood management and tidal wetlands, both of which you'll hear much more about from our civil engineer and our wetlands expert. So the rubric that the Coastal Management Act provides for you in talking about water-dependent uses begins with the site. Is the site suitable for water-dependent use? This site clearly is. Of the 11 plus acres, 8 are engineered and previously disturbed upland. It's got about 2,000 feet of waterfront and direct access to navigable waters. The other 3 plus minus acres are tidal wetlands, not suitable for water-dependent use, but needing to be protected and preserved. So what water-dependent uses is this site suited to? Well, Our focus here is on marinas, recreational and commercial boating facilities, shipyards, boat buildings, and water-based recreation, and uses which provide general public access to marine or tidal waters. These are all uses that are defined by the Coastal Management Act as water dependent. I've left out industrial and commercial uses that need large amount of cooling waters because that's not fitting for this site with its various constraints. So let's talk a little bit more about that. We've mentioned about the 3 acres that are tidal wetland, and the wetland proper and its landward edge are not suitable for water-dependent uses. They need to be protected and preserved. The site is situated in a densely populated, settled, narrow-streeted historic village community. It's bounded by and hosts an infill area of residential development, and the movement of large boats to and from storage at the site ranges from difficult to unsafe to inconsistent with adjacent use. The noises associated with shipyards and boat maintenance also range from inconvenient to inconsistent with the adjacent uses. The northern boundary of the site, however, is the municipal Mystic River Park. The park provides the opportunity for a natural, continuous public access way to and along the site, while the site provides the opportunity to strengthen the linkage to Mystic Village, its residential, commercial, and neighboring open space areas. The direct waterfront access further provides visual access to the scenic areas riverward of the site. The site also provides some gently sloped intertidal areas that are potentially available for small boat access and other water-based recreational activities. So those are the water-dependent uses for which this site is suited. So is this proposal then a water-dependent use? Yes, in meaningful and substantial ways. The project as proposed would retain and enhance a local and regionally significant marina with an increase in in-water slips and piers and dockside marina services. It will diversify the slip sizes in boats that it accommodates. It will provide for transient dockage. It will provide for pump-out facilities, minor boat repair capabilities on site, and importantly, a full range of boat maintenance services at its nearby sister facility. So in whole, we're not losing those boat services, we're migrating them to a location that can better accommodate them. There will be on-site marina offices, administrative offices, there can be boat sales, all of those uses that are associated with marinas but are not formally water-dependent uses. We're providing a small boat rental and launch area to enhance water-based recreational uses. Again, a statutorily defined water-dependent use. And emphasizing the fact that there's new, meaningful public access to and along the Mystic River, not just a walkway, but a walkway that leads to an open public gathering space. So again, the uniqueness of this site and its availability to enhance tourism, something that's also talked about in your plan of conservation and development for this site. Short walk from the downtown Mystic area, accessible to thousands of visitors, to one of Connecticut's main tourist attractions. So the master plan invites those tourists to a newly available waterfront riverwalk and riverfront plaza. Are there adverse impacts to water-dependent uses? Yes, but those adverse impacts are acceptable. And that's an important part of the rubric that's contained in the Coastal Management Act. This is not a take it or leave it, one and done consideration that you are charged with. We are eliminating some existing boat maintenance activities, as well as the launch and haul facilities and boat storage. We'd be utilizing a significant portion of the remaining upland for non-water dependent uses. These are, by definition, adverse impacts on water dependent use. But they're acceptable, and here's why. These adverse impacts cannot be avoided. This site, these current boat repair facilities, cannot and will not be sustained on site. They're housed in derelict buildings. The infrastructure needed to support them is not financially sustained by the uses that they support. The services are already being diverted to a more suitable nearby sister facility, and they will continue to migrate. So that use will be lost to this site one way or another. The economics of modern marina infrastructure require the kind of financial support unavailable from marine services alone. And the neighborhood and village surrounds, which are assets in so many ways, constrains the use of this site for moving large boats and providing what can quite frankly be noisy, dirty operations. So they can't be avoided, these adverse impacts. But they're being minimized. As I said, all the in-water services are being maintained and enhanced, including the removal of historically filled land and its return to both a natural resource of value and a boat basin to enhance transient boaters' visits. The remaining adverse impacts are being mitigated. So the kind of holy trinity of water-dependent use analysis, as well as we'll see later, natural resource evaluations. Avoid, minimize, mitigate. So the mitigation, the creation of the small boat access area and significant public access that would otherwise be unavailable to and through the site, and creates this continuum of access from Mystic River Park and on up to and through the village. And again, unique to this project proponent, the ability to maintain active launch and haul services, repair and maintenance services, not here in Mystic where it doesn't fit, but at its sister yard where it does. So that's the water-dependent use analysis that is available to you and for your consideration. Briefly, coastal hazard area and flood management. Smiler's Wharf is what is defined, is in what's defined as the coastal hazard area. As I believe all of Mystic, Stonington and Groton sides are. The coastal management statutes do not prohibit residential uses in coastal hazard areas. They require consideration of how to minimize impacts to life and property. Now, to deep, that may mean disallowing any new residential uses. But to a municipality that has to or wants to provide housing within an economically sustainable mixed-use plan, it means meeting all FEMA requirements, which we are doing, improving site-wide elevations and providing first-time ever stormwater management to improve dryer access and egress, which we are doing. Implementing a real-time on-site early warning and evacuation system, which we are doing, and creating a living shoreline surrounding the townhouse area to avoid the need for future flood and erosion control structures while improving our tidal wetlands protections. So we understand DEEP's concerns, but we account for them in the context of this comprehensive, sustainable plan. And finally, a little bit about the tidal wetlands. And as you'll hear in a moment, the tidal wetlands on this site range from totally degraded to lush and healthy. Our plan was designed to preserve and protect the existing healthy tidal wetlands and restore and enhance the degraded wetlands. The townhouse area is a minimum of 15 feet from any tidal wetland boundary. We're using that 15 feet to create a living shoreline which will protect the wetlands, to naturally to allow them to naturally migrate inland by virtue of the grading and the vegetation that we will place as part of that living shoreline. It's our concept to avoid future need for structural flood and erosion control structures for the townhouses by virtue of that design element. Additionally, and importantly, we'll be eradicating Phragmites and site-wide, which will enhance the health and the existing degraded wetlands and protect the healthy wetlands from being encroached upon and degraded by invasive species, which would otherwise occur. So, in addition to the Phragmites eradication, a program of removing invasives from the existing degraded wetlands will be undertaken. The lawn area, which is tidal wetlands, but mown as a lawn now, will be returned to wetland. None of these protections and enhancements of tidal wetlands will occur without this program for the site. So these analyses, water-dependent use, flood hazard area and flood management, and tidal wetlands protections apply equally to your determination of coastal consistency as they do with your determination of consistency with your own plan of conservation and development. So these are your determinations to make. That was the construct of the Coastal Management Act. And based on the information that's that's been previously submitted to the record, and I think enhanced here tonight through the presentation, we believe that you can make that finding of consistency. So, thank you. And now for more detail, I'll turn it over to Ron Nault, our civil engineer.
It's just the arrow keys, and I think that point is working.
Okay, hold on, just shoot myself. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Ron Nault. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in civil and environmental engineering, and I'm a professional engineer here in Connecticut. I'm a principal of the engineering firm of Luke's Consulting Engineers, 35 years experience, including similar coastal redevelopment projects. The master plan for redeveloping the Seaport Marine site as Smiler's Wharf was guided by the basic principles, as Jane alluded, avoidance, minimization, and mitigation, while also providing an economically sustainable upland plan to support the site's water-dependent components through mixed-use development. In general terms, we sought to protect and preserve the areas of healthy resources and tidal wetlands through avoidance of development in these areas and focusing redevelopment on those areas of existing man-made disturbed portions of the site. This will result in an improvement in the land-water interface with a stabilized shoreline and adjacent upland buffer zones, including the living shoreline. The proposed development plan will also provide a significant improvement in stormwater runoff quality by collecting, storing, infiltrating, and treating runoff prior to discharge into the Mystic River and wetlands. To illustrate the proposed improvements, we will take you through a review of the existing conditions before we move into the engineering proportions of the proposed site development plan. Starting at the northwest corner of the site adjacent to the Mystic River Park, at the corner of Cottrell and Washington Streets, this area is dominated by a heavily man-made and impacted shoreline in the boat launch and boat service area. As seen in these photos, As seen in these photos and the plan of existing conditions, the land-water interface is a low-lying angular geometry of wood cribbing and crushed stone comprising a derelict bulkhead and unprotected shoreline structure. Frequent tidal flooding and decay result in driving forces for erosion and sedimentation of the upland directly into the Mystic River and adjacent coves and bays. Moving further south along the shoreline, the site takes us into the area of active marine use and the Red 36 restaurant. This area will remain completely undisturbed, and we won't spend much time on this segment. Continuing to the southern area of the site, the shoreline brings us further along the Mystic River and into the start of the cove area. Existing dockhead elevated walkways take boaters from the upland areas to the major active marina boat slip areas of Seaport Marine. The shoreline here degrades into an area of invasive phragmites and knotweed thickets, yielding very little natural resource habitat, as Rich Snarsky will soon discuss in more detail. Continuing along the shoreline and inland of the open cove and wetlands takes us to a low-lying but developed lawn area and office building that are not part of this project. Again, this area will remain unchanged, and we won't spend much time in this area. Continuing north and approaching Washington Street, the shoreline is a disturbed zone of man-made landforms rising to existing lawn areas. Completing the traverse by moving easterly, we reach the area of healthy tidal wetland marshes. This area will remain completely undisturbed. It's important to note that there are no stormwater management measures currently employed at the site. Stormwater runoff now flows unabated across the site and discharges directly to the Mystic River Basin with suspended solids, oil and grease, nutrients, and other contaminants. That means that the wetlands and water quality are adversely impacted by routine stormwater runoff under existing conditions. Now Rich Snarsky will review the existing natural resources of the site and opportunities for mitigation measures.
My name is Rich Snarsky. I'm a professional wetland scientist and a registered soil scientist. I've been delineating wetlands in the town of Stonington for 36 years. I also specialize. I also specialize in wetland restoration and creation. I delineated the tidal wetland boundary on this parcel. As shown in the site plan to the right is where the tidal marsh, the 3-acre tidal marsh occurs. Let me just back up a minute. As Ron mentioned, the western side of the property is pretty much all urbanized, and there's no tidal wetlands along the Mystic River. It's pretty much bulkheads and I pushed it. Okay, sorry. The tidal wetlands begin at this area here, a little past the restaurant, the eastern side of the restaurant. And then as we go up northerly, here's the cove area. And all these different colors are the different vegetation types within the tidal marsh. Portion of the tidal marsh is degraded by the exotic invasive plant Phragmites, which occurs dominantly in this area, and along in here. This section is a healthy tidal marsh, which is composed of all native vegetation, tidal wetland species. Part of the proposal is to enhance the shoreline along the tidal marsh. In this area here, which is dominated by Japanese knotweed and also Phragmites in here, and Japanese knotweed and Phragmites here, will be eradicated and will be restored to create a healthy living shoreline, which will be involved in planting native shrub species and native herbaceous plant species. In addition, Ron, how do you move that picture out to? This is the area where that's dominated by Japanese knotweed and Phragmites. And this area will be restored to a natural living shoreline with all native species, which I was just mentioning. In addition, here's the Phragmites along the shoreline here. And over here on the eastern side is a healthy tidal marsh. But all the Phragmites throughout the whole tidal wetland marsh system will be eradicated, and this will increase the habitat value for shoreline birds such as egrets and herons, which also frequent the area, mostly on the eastern side of the marshland over here. This is a cross-section of the living shoreline, where here we'll be eradicating the exotic invasive plants. Here's Phragmites, Japanese knotweed, and then be planting native shrubland species in here to create a native plant community, which will blend down into the tidal marsh system, which we're calling a living shoreline.
Thanks, Rich. Looking ahead to the proposed conditions, as mentioned earlier, Smiler's Wharf redevelopment seeks to protect the healthy resources and marshes by avoiding work in those areas, focusing on the disturbed. The proposed redevelopment plan will result in an improved shoreline zone, improved shoreline buffer, promoting healthy tidal wetlands ecosystem, more open space, more public access, and more subtidal and open water habitat. As Meg showed you the proposed architectural master plan, I will focus on the proposed supporting engineering and infrastructure aspects. First, the shoreline. Again, starting at the northwest corner, matching to and protecting the flank of the town's bulkhead at the center of the park, at the end of the park. Seaport Marine proposes to continue the bulkhead and cap on their property around the shoreline to create a stabilized shoreline resistant to erosion, turbidity, and debris release. The bulkhead and cap will allow construction of an adjacent public boardwalk welcoming visitors onto and around the Seaport Marine site as shown. The green areas are public access extension from Cottrell Street straight down onto the boardwalk to the plaza area that Meg showed, continuing around the hotel, leading to the edge of Red 36, including the Crescent Park in that area. It is also proposed to remove 2 areas of man-made fill totaling approximately 14,000 square feet to create an enlarged open water basin to enhance transient marine capabilities to attract boating tourism. The new in this area here and here, those upland areas will be removed and created as open basin. The new shoreline sheet pile bulkhead will be installed landward of the existing timber cribbing and crushed stone shoreline and provide for its removal. The proposed shoreline sheet pile bulkhead will be extended southerly to tie into a stabilized riprap shoreline at the beginning of the marina boat slip operations. So the bulkhead would connect to the park bulkhead here, extend around the shoreline basin, around the existing landform here, and connect to an area of stabilized riprap faced shoreline. The existing shoreline will remain undisturbed from here southerly to and around the Red 36 restaurant area to the beginning of the peninsula and land between the Mystic River and Cove Embayment. So undisturbed through here around the restaurant over to that point. Moving the shoreline around the perimeter of the South Peninsula is comprised of the degraded zone, as Rich described, dominated by invasive knotweed and Phragmites. The plan is to create a living shoreline buffer enhancement along this entire stretch. If you can see in green, but the area of invasives and knotweed, Phragmites removed, and the living shoreline encircling this peninsula here, as well as the living shoreline along the flanks of the degraded zone there to the north. Continuing north as we approach Washington Street, the same living shoreline leading to the undisturbed portion of the healthy tidal marsh along the eastern side of the site. So summarizing the shoreline interface, the result of the proposed measures will be a stabilized shoreline yielding a resilient coastline to resist storm and sea level forces. Existing degraded areas of invasives in the non-infringement zone will be improved through the eradication and implementation of the living shoreline. Now moving to the upland development, the site will be served by a well-organized and delineated network of driveways, sidewalks, and parking areas. This will result in improved safety by designing for emergency vehicle access and better overall traffic and pedestrian management. The main development access will be extension of Willow Street into the site with a roundabout feature, all designed for fire truck access, surface parking areas, all well delineated surface parking areas here as well around the site. Full utility infrastructure will be provided with potable and fire protection water supply, wastewater collection, once the interconnection to the Mystic plant has been implemented, as well as electric and communication service. As part of the proposed upland redevelopment plan, a completely new stormwater management system will be implemented to meet or exceed the town and state deep standards for collection, detention, infiltration, and treatment. Stormwater management plan will utilize structural and non-structural best management practices, such as pervious pavement to reduce runoff and promote infiltration, infiltration trenches to collect and infiltrate runoff, rain gardens to reduce contaminants and promote infiltration, perforated conveyance pipe to allow detention and infiltration. We like infiltration. Catch basins with hoods and sumps to collect runoff and reduce trash and oil discharge. Subsurface detention and infiltration systems, typically under parking areas, to store runoff to reduce peak flows and promote infiltration. And finally, outfall treatment and discharge. Exact locations will be finalized with each individual site plan application. During the construction phase, measures will be included to prevent soil erosion and sedimentation, such as silt fence, hay bales, sediment basins, and turbidity curtains. These measures will represent a significant improvement to the water quality on and adjacent to the site, removing such contaminants as suspended solids, oil and grease, metals, nutrients, and trash. And lastly, flood mitigation. The impacts of sea level rise have been fully considered in the development of Smiler's Wharf site plan. These measures include shoreline stabilization of the current dilapidated timber bulkhead into an elevated structural shoreline, provision of living shoreline in areas of distressed non-structural shoreline now dominated by invasives, elevating the site to allow for better access and egress, and a vigorous stormwater management features to reduce flooding and drastically improve stormwater runoff quality. Now Ron Dagan will review the site parking plan.
Good evening. I'm Ron Dagan. I'm a professional engineer in the state of Connecticut. I hold an engineering degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in transportation engineering. I have over 30 years of experience providing traffic engineering consultation in the state of Connecticut, and I'm a principal at Luke's Consulting Engineers. I'm here to talk about the parking, demand, and supply. Parking on site was given careful consideration to provide adequate parking, but also reflecting the mixed-use site design and the shared parking potential as recognized by the Neighborhood Development District, NDD, zoning regulations. I'd like to briefly go over the process we went through to determine the adequacy of parking in the proposed site. First, we determined the parking requirements for each individual proposed building use, following the zoning regulation of the town of Stonington. This represents the parking demand as for each building as it is used independently and at full occupation at the same time. Next, we wanted to reflect reality where some of the parking spaces within the project area can be shared by different uses at different times. This was done to avoid building large parking lots, which, we'll leave it alone, which will be vacant, which would not serve the desired visual image of the proposed project and the town of Mystic. This is recognized in both the town zoning regs for NDD development and the Institute of Transportation Engineer, ITE, Parking Generation Manual. I'll briefly go over each of the site parking requirements. Starting with hotel, apartments, townhouses. You can fix it?
Yeah, pardon me.
No problem. I could have done that. Thanks.
Yeah.
For the hotel, apartments, townhouses, and multifamily houses, we assumed that there'll be no sharing of parking. Each required parking space as determined by your zoning regs was provided. We also assumed full occupancy at the time of the analysis. Next comes the assembly area for special events. It is assumed that the activities at those areas generally will be scheduled off-peak at noon and afternoon hours during the summer season or during the off-season. In the rare instance where the function is to take place in the evening at the peak summer season, off-site parking conditions with shuttle service would be stipulated in the lease agreement with the event organizers. The Marine Service Office. It is expected that the Marine Office will be occupied during regular working hours, which do not coincide with the peak hours, and therefore those numbers were adjusted. The boat slips and kayak pavilion. It is reasonable to assume that 15 to 20% of the boat slip users are expected to stay on site and accommodated in the hotel or residences parking area, thus reducing the required parking spaces. In addition, 35 slips will be kept for boaters that are transient visitors who do not require parking. Red 36 restaurant and the new restaurant. In order to faithfully reflect expected conditions, the total number of required parking spaces for the restaurants needed to be adjusted and modified to account for two elements. The first one is due to the proximity of the restaurants to downtown Mystic and the extension of the pedestrian boardwalk. It is conservatively anticipated that 10% of the restaurant visitors would walk from other locations that would not need parking space. In addition, following the recommendations of the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Handbook, it is expected that during the peak hour, 9% of the restaurant traffic would be internal from the hotel, apartments, and townhouses already parked on the site. In summary, as shown on the table, the total parking demand for visitors and residents for all uses listed herein is 264 parking spaces. In addition, 53 parking spaces would be required, 8 for the hotel staff, 15 for the Red 36 restaurant staff, and 30 for the new restaurant, totaling 317 spaces in all. Now, what is the parking space provided? On the site, the plan provides 318 parking spaces. It is evident that there is enough parking space available to accommodate both visitors, residents, and staff within the on-site parking lots. It should be noted that in reality, the owners will require all employees to park at the Mystic Packer building during peak busy time. I keep doing that, I'm sorry. Thanks. I'll repeat. It should be noted that in reality, the owners will require all employees to park at the Mystic Packer building during peak busy times and free up 53 additional parking on sites for customers and the public. In addition to that, to provide additional safety margin, 54 additional parking spaces within walking distance are proposed at the medical office building, which is adjacent to the development. Can you point to it? No, I will. It can be the pointer.
Sorry.
Right there. So at the medical office building and at the Mystic Oil site. So as you can see, not only does our on-site parking, available parking, exceed the demand, we also have a safety margin of 54 spaces within walking distance to the project. So in summary, as Meg said, we not only provide enough parking for the development, we actually have over 50 spaces above and beyond what is required. Thank you. With that, Ron?
Summarizing the engineering components, with the Smilers Wharf redevelopment plan, we have sought to preserve and protect the healthy natural resources by avoiding any work in the most sensitive areas of the Cove area and east side of the site, improve the degraded site in areas of impacted natural resources, such as removal of invasives and creation of the living shoreline enhanced buffer, replacing the derelict shoreline structures that allow for erosion and sedimentation into the river without a stabilized shoreline, removal of 14,000 square feet of man-made fill areas to regain open water and benthic bottomland habitat, design for flood mitigation using widely accepted engineering and environmental measures, provision of a well-organized and delineated network of driveways, sidewalks, and parking areas for improved safety and access for emergency vehicles, and provision of stormwater management systems to collect, detain, infiltrate, and treat runoff before entering the river and wetlands with full supporting utility infrastructure. This master plan provides an economically sustainable upland plan to support the site cleanup, addition of public access, and to enhance the active boating components to create a destination marina experience complementary to the character of Mystic. Thank you. Todd?